Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're jumping right in. We're tackling something you've probably thought about. What really makes us tick as humans?
Yeah, like are we born with instructions or is it all learned?
Exactly. We're getting into the weeds of human instinct. We've looked at, well, a lot of stuff, science, psychology, even AI perspectives.
Right. And the goal is simple, really.
Yeah. Pull out the key ideas for you, make sense of it all without the heavy jargon.
So the big question we're wrestling with is, do humans even have instincts? And what does that word even mean today?
It's a huge question.
It really is. And you see right away from the sources, the definition itself is, well, it's controversial.
How so?
Well, the basic idea is, an instinct is innate, born with it, no learning needed.
Okay, sounds simple enough.
But then you get stricter definitions, like F.B. Mandel's. The criteria are super demanding.
Oh, like what?
It has to be automatic, irresistible, pop up at a certain age, triggered by something specific. Everyone has it. You can't change it. And needs zero practice.
Wow. Irresistible. Unmodifiable. That seems intense.
It really does.
Makes you think about, say, a mother's protective urge. Strong, yeah, but always irresistible. Can it be modified?
Exactly. Parenting looks different everywhere, right? Clearly modified by learning, so that strict definition hits a wall pretty fast with humans.
Yeah, you see the tension immediately.
Totally. And historically, it was simpler. Animals instinct, humans reason, nice and neat.
Until Darwin.
Right. Darwin comes along, suggests common ancestry, maybe instincts evolve too. Later, Maslow argues, hey, we can override these things.
So they're not irresistible.
Which maybe means they're more like strong drives, not rigid instincts. So yeah, the fuzzy definition, it reflects this deeper debate about, nature versus nurture. How much are we programmed? How much is choice?
Okay, so if it's not this super rigid thing, how do we even separate it from, say, a reflex, like blinking? Or, something we learn, like riding a bike?
Good question. Reflexes are simple. Quick, involuntary responses, basic nervous system stuff, knee-jerk pupil dilation. Instincts, supposedly, are more complex behavior patterns, learned stuff. That comes from experience, practice, seeing others do it.
So instinct is the hardwired foundation.
That's the idea. Provides a starting point without needing trial and error. Learning gives flexibility, but you might get it wrong first.
But the lines get blurry.
Oh, yeah. Experience can definitely tweak an instinct, like a bird learning to fly better. And it seems like we're born ready to learn some things easier than others. Language, for instance.
Right, okay. So let's dig into some of the big theories our sources mentioned. Freud always comes up with the mind stuff. What was his take on instinct?
Freud called them drives, Trieb. He saw them as these basic biological forces starting in the body, creating psychological needs, like mental energy demanding release.
Biological demands.
Yeah, think survival, sex eros.
Yeah.
And aggression, destruction, thanatos. He thought these operate mostly unconsciously, but powerfully shape our thoughts, feelings, actions, even if we don't realize it.
So deep, hidden biological currents pushing us around. Okay. Then there's ethology, studying animals in the wild. Lorenz, Tinbergen. What do they add?
Ethology focused on innate, species-specific stuff. How animals act naturally. Their big concept was the fixed action pattern, or FAP.
FAP?
Yeah, like a pre-programmed behavior sequence. It gets triggered reliably by a specific cue, a sign stimulus.
Like a bird's mating dance.
Exactly. Triggered by seeing the right kind of mate. Early ethologists saw these as pretty rigid in animals. Lorenz's work on imprinting is famous too, shows how an innate tendency, like attachment, gets locked onto something specific early on. A mix of innate and learned, really.
Okay, so more focused on these specific triggers and responses, especially in animals. Now, behaviorism, Watson, and folks, they went the other way, didn't they? Almost tossed instinct out completely.
Totally. Behaviorism was huge for a while. They basically said instinct is unscientific because you can't directly see or measure it.
Right. Only observable behavior counts.
Pretty much. Watson argued, yeah, maybe a few basic reflexes, but almost everything else is learned through conditioning. Rewards, punishments, associations. The environment shapes us.
A complete flip from innate programming. But hang on, some early psychologists did believe in instincts, right? Like Wundt and James.
Yeah, not everyone jumped ship. Wundt thought natural selection shaped our nervous system to produce these hereditary drives, working unconsciously. Kind of like instincts.
And William James.
James had a really interesting view. He thought humans have more instincts than animals, but ours are way more flexible, modifiable by experience, habits. They could even fade if unused.
More instincts, but less rigid. What about McDougall?
McDougall initially talked about innate tendencies linked to emotions driving us towards goals. Later, he preferred the term propensity for humans to emphasize we're less fixed than animals seem to be.
Okay, so recognizing innate roots, but acknowledging human flexibility.
Yeah.
Which brings us to modern evolutionary psychology. They seem to be bringing innate factors back, yeah.
Definitely. Evolutionary psychology talks about evolved psychological mechanisms, or EPMs.
EPMs.
Think of them as mental tools, shaped by natural selection over ages to solve recurring problems our ancestors faced. Survival, mating, cooperation, avoiding danger.
So things like fear, or mate choice, or helping kin-caw, they have innate roots in these EPMs.
That's the core argument. These mechanisms give us predispositions, tendencies that helped our ancestors survive and reproduce. Language capacity is another big one they point to.
It's wild to see the idea swing back and forth like that. Acceptance, then rejection, now this more nuanced view. This table, comparing the theories in our sources, is pretty helpful, actually.
Yeah, it lays it out clearly.
So, okay, let's circle back to the big one. Based on all this, do humans really have instincts?
Well, like we said, it hinges on that definition, doesn't it? If
Yeah.
you use that super strict Mandel definition, automatic, irresistible, unmodifiable, universal, no learning, then honestly, many scientists would say humans probably don't have many true instincts, maybe none at all.
Why not?
Because even really basic stuff, like eating or mothering, we can consciously override them. People fast. Tragically, some parents harm their kids. That's very different from, say, a squirrel burying nuts. That seems much more automatic.
We have that choice, that ability to go against the grain.
Right. But if you take a broader view, think innate tendencies, biological predispositions, those EPMs.
Then the argument shifts.
Exactly. Proponents point to things like infant reflexes, sucking, grasping. Those seem undeniably built in.
Okay.
Basic emotions, too, like that instant fight or flight jolt when you sense danger or disgust protecting you from bad food, seems pretty fundamental for survival.
And social stuff.
Yeah, arguments for innate foundations for altruism, fairness, recognizing faces quickly, our knack for language. Evolutionary psychology grounds a lot of complex social behavior in these evolved instinct-like roots.
Okay, but our sources also mentioned developmental systems theory. That sounds like it complicates things further.
It does. It pushes back against the idea that instincts are just pre-programmed by genes alone. It argues behaviors emerge from this really complex, ongoing dance between genes and the environment, physical, social, everything throughout development. So even something that looks innate isn't just a gene blueprint unfolding, it's interactive.
Wow. It really highlights how complex we are. Our big brains, learning, culture, self-reflection, it all lets us shape or override those biological nudges in ways other animals mostly can't.
Exactly. The whole debate kind of shows that those simple animal models of instinct just don't capture human reality very well. It's messier.
Definitely messier. Okay, so maybe true instincts are rare, but let's look at the kinds of things often discussed as instincts, starting with survival. Self-preservation seems like a no-brainer, right? Seeking food, water, sleep, safety.
Absolutely fundamental, the basic.
And fight or flight. We feel danger, boom, heart pounds, adrenaline surges, ready to react. Seems pretty automatic.
Very powerful physiological and psychological response. Amygdala fires up, autonomic nervous system goes wild, hormones flood in, classic survival circuit.
Disgust, too. That revulsion feeling.
Yeah, strong evolutionary roots there. Keeps us from eating poisons or contaminated stuff. Protects us.
And specific fears, like snakes, spiders, heights. Lots of people seem naturally wary of those.
Right. The idea is we might be innately prepared to fear things that were real dangers to our ancestors. Learning shapes the specifics, sure, but that initial readiness seems built in for some threats.
But even here, we see that human override, right? People fast, like you said.
Yeah.
Or do extreme sports, deliberately facing danger.
Exactly. That flexibility, that conscious choice, it keeps popping up, challenging the irresistible part of strict instinct definitions.
Okay. Now, Panksepp's work on core emotional systems, affective neuroscience, that seems relevant here. What were those main systems?
Panksepp identified these fundamental, evolutionarily old emotional circuits in the brain, 7 main ones.
7.
Yeah. They're seeking, that's like curiosity, exploration, wanting stuff, driven by dopamine, rage, anger, frustration, fear, anxiety, escape, LUS, sex drive, care, nurturing, parental feelings, panic, grief, separation, distress, social loss, and play, social joy, learning limits.
So these aren't just vague feelings, they're actual brain systems with jobs to do.
Precisely. And they interact constantly. Disruptions in these systems are increasingly linked to things like depression or addiction. It connects our basic biology to our emotional landscape.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Okay, shifting to our social side. Humans are super social. What about social instincts? Mating, parenting, cooperation, tribalism.
Yeah, evolutionary psychology spends a lot of time here.
Right.
Suggests we have evolved mating strategies, what we look for in a partner, how we compete, short-term versus long-term approaches, all aimed ultimately at reproductive success.
Parental investment theory fits in here too.
Right. The idea that the parent investing more resources, usually the female, historically will be choosier, and behaviors like mate guarding or forming pair bonds seem to have evolutionary roots too.
And parental care itself feels pretty instinctual for many. That drive to protect your kids.
Hugely important for survival. Hormones like oxytocin are key for bonding. The tend and befriend response, especially in females under stress nurturing kids, building social support seems like a core evolved strategy. Paternal investment, too, while variable, is significant in humans.
Okay, what about cooperation and altruism? Seems counterintuitive from a purely selfish gene perspective, but essential for society.
Right, but cooperation gives huge group advantages. So theories like kin selection, helping relatives who share your genes, and reciprocal altruism, I scratch your back, you scratch mine, help explain it. Maybe even an innate sense of fairness keeps cooperation stable. Darwin thought sympathy and love were evolved social instincts.
Then there's the flip side, tribalism, forming in-groups, being wary of out-groups.
Yeah, that us versus them tendency likely evolved because tight-knit groups had an edge in competing with other groups for resources or safety back in the day. Social structures themselves might reflect basic patterns, like how we relate based on community or hierarchy.
And fairness again. It feels deep-seated. Kids protest unfairness really early.
Exactly. Probably evolved to keep groups working together smoothly. We react negatively to perceived unfairness, even if it costs us personally sometimes, forms the basis for morality, law, maybe.
Which clashes with nepotism,
Right.
favoring your own family or group.
Big time. Nepotism comes straight from kin selection, help those who share your genes. Adaptive in small groups, maybe, but causes major problems with fairness and meritocracy in modern societies.
So our social instincts are this mix of cooperative and competitive, inclusive and exclusive tendencies constantly in tension.
Absolutely. And culture and conscious choice heavily influence how we navigate that tension.
Okay, moving beyond behavior and emotion, what about cognitive instincts? Things like learning language, understanding numbers, intuition.
Yeah, this broadens the idea of instinct. Language acquisition is a prime example. Kids pick it up so fast, so easily, it makes people like Chomsky and Pinker argue for innate language faculty, like we're born with a blueprint for grammar.
A language instinct.
Kind of. And similarly, there's evidence for a basic number sense, an intuitive grasp of quantity, right from infancy, before formal teaching.
Interesting. Innate ways of processing the world. What about logic or morality? Can intuition be instinctual?
Some philosophical traditions think so innate ideas, an intuitive grasp of certain truths. Hume thought intellect grew out of instinct. Moral foundations theory suggests we have these innate sensitivities to harm, fairness, loyalty, authority, purity that act like intuitive moral taste buds.
So moral judgments might often be quick gut feelings based on these foundations.
That's the idea. Intuition in general, those fast, unconscious judgments, often feels instinctual. Even experts like physicists develop this deep intuition, this feel for their subject.
Almost like an automatized skill.
Yeah, like System 1 thinking, based on learned patterns but functioning automatically. So instinct can stretch to cover these cognitive structures and processing styles. It's a whole spectrum.
From basic drives to how we think. And they're often competing.
Always competing, making human behavior this constant negotiation.
Okay, let's shift to the evolutionary and biological roots. Natural selection is obviously key here.
Foundational. Behaviors or mental mechanisms that helped ancestors survive and reproduce got passed on. Instincts are basically genetically influenced solutions to old adaptive problems.
Like being wary of snakes, wanting kids, being loyal to your group.
Exactly. Even maybe greed in times of scarcity. Wundt thought selection acted directly on the nervous system to create these drives. Darwin saw morality evolving from social instincts.
But then there's that evolutionary mismatch idea we touched on.
Crucial concept. Our instincts evolved for a very different world, the environment of evolutionary adaptedness, or EEA, small hunter-gatherer groups, likely.
And now?
Now, those same instincts can be maladaptive, craving sugary, fatty foods, great when calories were scarce, bad now with abundance. Tribal loyalty. Vital then, potentially disastrous now on a global scale. fight or flight, useful for escaping a lion, less so for dealing with chronic work stress.
Our old programming running in a new operating system.
That's a good way to put it. Understanding mismatch helps explain a lot of modern problems.
Beyond selection, what about genetics and this gene-culture co-evolution thing?
Well, instincts are tied to biology, so genetics is involved. They're innate hereditary tendencies. But it's rarely simple, like one gene equals one instinct, especially in us.
Right, developmental systems theory again.
Yeah.
Genes and environment interacting.
Exactly. And gene-culture coevolution is super interesting for human uniqueness. It's the idea that our genes and our culture influence each other's evolution.
How does that work?
Culture changes our environment, which changes the pressures on our genes, like dairy farming favoring genes for lactose tolerance. This feedback loop helps explain things like large-scale cooperation, fairness norms, complex moral systems. They likely emerge from this interplay of biology and cultural learning over millennia.
Wow. A dance between nature and nurture playing out over evolutionary time.
Okay.
Okay, let's get specific. Neurobiology. What's happening in the brain with instincts?
A lot is happening in the limbic system, that older part of the brain. The amygdala is huge for fear and threat detection.
Okay.
Hypothalamus regulates basic needs, hunger, thirst, sleep, body temp, and controls the autonomic nervous system, hormones. Thalamus is like a relay station for senses. Hippocampus is crucial for memory, context.
And Panksepp mapped his emotional systems onto brain circuits.
Yeah. Seeking heavily involves dopamine pathways. Care uses oxytocin. Fear triggers stress hormones like cortisol. It's becoming more mapped out. Mirror neurons, too. They fire when we do something and when we see someone else do it. Might be involved in empathy, imitation, social learning.
So these older brain regions handle the core stuff. How does the cortex, the thinking part, fit in?
The prefrontal cortex, PFC, is key. It exerts top-down control. It lets us regulate, inhibit, or reinterpret those limbic signals based on context, goals, learning. It gives us that flexibility.
The override capability.
Exactly. There's even research on how other brain bits help us learn to suppress fear. It's hierarchical. Basic survival stuff downstairs, flexible control upstairs.
A multi-level system.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so are these instincts universal, or do they vary?
Bit of both. There seems to be universality in the basic drives: hunger, thirst, and the capacity for basic emotions. Facial expressions are recognized pretty much worldwide.
But the expression varies wildly.
Hugely. How we show emotion, what triggers it, how we manage it, that's heavily shaped by culture. Eating habits, aggression norms, sexual behavior, massive cultural differences, plus individual variation based on biology, personality, sex, age.
So maybe universal potential, but culturally shaped reality.
That seems like a good summary. A shared human foundation, but incredible diversity in how it plays out thanks to development, culture, environment.
Which leads perfectly into how instinct interacts with everything else: culture, learning, thinking. It's not just raw instinct, is it?
Almost never in humans. That old idea of innate versus learned being separate, it's largely seen as a false dichotomy now. They're woven together. Instinct might provide the initial push, the basic pattern, but experience refines it. James said experience makes instincts less blind. Learning shapes what triggers a response, improves the action, makes us less sensitive, or lets us consciously override it.
So learning builds on the instinctual foundation.
Or even the capacity to learn is itself an innate adaptation. Even simple-looking instincts unfold through development in an environment. It's always interactive.
And culture is a massive environmental influence.
Huge. Culture sets the rules. Social norms dictate what's okay for eating, fighting, mating, everything. Socialization is how we learn to internalize those rules, regulate our impulses.
Culture even gives meaning to instinctual actions.
Right. A glance, a smile. The meaning depends on cultural context. It's reciprocal. Culture shapes instincts, but instincts also motivate cultural practices. Learning and culture really transform instincts' role in human life.
And then there's conscious thought, our ability to reason, deliberate, choose against the grain. It feels uniquely powerful in humans.
It really does seem to be a defining feature. That prefrontal cortex allows for deliberation, evaluating impulses, making choices counter to immediate urges.
Like Maslow said, that's why he hesitated to call them true instincts.
Exactly. Which dives us right into the free will debate. Are we determined by prior causes, including instincts, or do we have real freedom?
Big philosophical questions.
Huge. Determinism versus libertarianism versus compatibilism, trying to reconcile them. And neuroscience complicates it too, right? With studies like Libet's suggesting brain activity starts before we're consciously aware of deciding.
So is conscious will just a veto power, maybe?
Or
Something else?
it's still a puzzle. How conscious reasoning, unconscious processes, instincts, and free will all fit together. We don't have the final answer.
Definitely not. And our instincts are tied up with emotions and how we think too, right? System 1 and System 2.
Absolutely. Emotions are often the subjective feeling of an instinctual drive firing up, or a response to something important. Panksepp's work fits perfectly here.
And System 1 thinking, that
Mhm.
fast, intuitive stuff.
That's largely driven by emotion and instinct. It uses mental shortcuts, heuristics, quick and efficient, usually, but prone to biases.
Like judging based on feelings or seeking confirming evidence.
Exactly. Affect heuristic, confirmation bias, availability heuristic. Lots of cognitive biases stem from relying too much on System 1.
And System 2 is the slow, deliberate thinking.
Right. Effortful, logical. It's what we use to analyze, override biases, make complex decisions. Higher cognitive ability seems linked to better use of System 2.
So the model is often instinct emotion, System 1 initiates, consciousness, System 2 monitors, and maybe corrects.
That's a common way to think about it, yeah, a constant interplay.
Okay, so let's broaden that again. How do these instincts shape society itself, not just individuals?
Profoundly. That in-group, out-group tendency, tribalism, likely underlies group formation, cooperation within groups, competition between them.
Social structures too, hierarchies, ways of sharing.
Yeah, some theories suggest basic social structures reflect innate ways of relating. Even leadership might tap into evolved prototypes of what we look for in a leader, though mismatch can be a problem in modern leadership too.
And laws, governance.
They seem intertwined with instincts for order, fairness, reciprocity. Some talk about a law instinct. Effective institutions probably need to be somewhat compatible with our underlying human nature. Understanding instincts is key for building societies that work.
And what about our personal relationships? How do instincts play out there?
Basic things like proximity matter, we connect with those near us. Instincts for care and cooperation obviously underpin friendship and family bonds. We talk about gut feelings about people.
But nepotism pops up again, favoring kin or friends.
Yeah, that instinct can clash with fairness ethics in wider society or workplaces. It's that tension between deep-seated kin preference and broader ideals of impartiality.
Okay, so the moral landscape. It seems instinct provides the raw material for ethics.
That's a strong argument. Morality seems rooted in evolved instincts like empathy, fairness, reciprocity. Moral foundations theory suggests these innate sensitivities, care, fairness, loyalty, authority, purity, are like a first draft of morality, which culture then revises.
So moral judgments are often fast intuitions.
Often, yes. Based on these foundations, belief systems, like religions or ideologies, then often build on, codify, and shape these intuitions, promoting certain values or behaviors. Philosophical ethics also wrestles constantly with the role of instinct versus reason.
Which brings us back to responsibility. If instincts drive behavior, including moral judgments, what does that mean for culpability? Right versus wrong.
It's the free will question again in an ethical context. If neurobiology shows unconscious influences, how much conscious control do we really have? Legal systems already grapple with this crime of passion, diminished capacity. It's really tough to draw lines for moral responsibility given all these underlying factors.
Super complex. So, given their power, can we manage or modify these instincts? Or are we stuck with them?
No, we're definitely not stuck. We have ways to manage them. Internally, there's conscious cognitive control things taught in cognitive behavioral therapy, like restructuring thoughts, mindfulness. We can learn to regulate.
And externally.
Learning and conditioning are huge. Socialization teaches us cultural norms, how to channel or suppress impulses. Of course, there are darker sides too, like manipulation through propaganda, trying to override basic instincts. But generally, learning and culture are powerful shapers.
And our circumstances matter too, right? Trauma, illness, scarcity.
Absolutely. Trauma can mess with the fight-flight-freeze system. Mental or physical illness can dysregulate basic drives. Scarcity can increase focus on short-term needs, impairing control. Intelligence might offer greater capacity for modulation. It's all interconnected.
This table summarizing those factors is useful too. Okay, that thought experiment. Life without instincts. What would it be?
Hard to imagine, really. Life ruled only by unchecked instinct. Chaos. Society wouldn't work.
And life with no instincts at all.
What would motivate us? No drive to eat, connect, reproduce, explore, learn. We might be intelligent machines, but perhaps without purpose or drive. It suggests instincts are a necessary foundation, not just primitive leftovers.
A crucial part of being human. Okay, looking ahead. AI. How is artificial intelligence changing how we understand or even interact with instinct?
AI offers new tools. Computational models try to simulate how instincts work, test theories. Agent-based modeling, evolutionary algorithms, they help us explore the dynamics.
So AI for understanding. What about simulating or modifying?
There's work in effective computing teaching AI to recognize human emotions. AI chatbots for therapy are emerging. AI can also be used to detect biases that might stem from instinctual thinking. But there are limits and risks, of course.
Right.
This other table on AI applications gives some examples.
Right, which brings up the ethics. If AI can understand, simulate, maybe even influence our instincts, that sounds potentially tricky.
Extremely tricky. Big ethical questions arise. Human autonomy, is AI guidance really choice? Manipulation, could AI exploit our emotional buttons or biases? Privacy, all that sensitive data. Fairness, AI inheriting and amplifying human biases. Even the moral status of AI itself.
Huge considerations.
Yeah. We need transparency, accountability, human-centered design, careful regulation. It's a major frontier.
And what about the future of our instincts themselves? Will they adapt?
Well, evolution happens slowly, but gene-culture coevolution continues. AI itself could become a powerful cultural force shaping us. Some instincts, like seeking curiosity, exploration, seem vital for tackling future challenges. Cooperation beyond narrow in-groups will be crucial, too.
So the challenges might select for different expressions of our underlying nature.
Potentially. It highlights the need for ethical foresight, especially in developing powerful technologies like AI.
So rather than trying to eliminate instincts, maybe the goal is better management, mitigation.
That seems more realistic and probably wiser. Individually, awareness, emotional regulation skills, therapy, managing stress and scarcity mindsets help.
And societally.
Designing institutions compatible with human nature, promoting universal values over tribalism, ethical tech development, addressing root causes of problems like inequality that might trigger maladaptive instincts.
It's about creating environments where our better angels, maybe rooted in cooperative instincts, can flourish.
Something like that. Empowering people and shaping constructive environments seems better than trying to directly re-engineer human nature, especially with something as complex and potentially risky as AI intervention.
A path of wisdom, perhaps.
Hopefully.
Well, wrapping this up, it's just incredibly clear how complex human instinct is. It's not one thing.
Not at all. It's this constant dynamic dance between our biology, our culture, how we learn, how we think.
And understanding the dance feels more important than ever, navigating modern life, figuring out AI. So here's a final thought for you listening in. Take a moment sometime. Think about your own gut feelings, your automatic reactions versus your reasoned choices. How do those innate tendencies and your learned habits play out in your day?
Yeah, what's that interplay tell you about yourself and maybe about the society you're in?
It really comes down to that balance, doesn't it? Between these ancient drives we carry and our amazing capacity for conscious choice. Thanks for diving deep with us today.
This is DigitView.